close it before we start?
Close it
Sorry,
before
we'll close
start.
it before we start.
Yeah, because it bothers us when people keep on moving or talking.
Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, we are just about to start. We're just about ready. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is David Eads. I'm a presenter with BBC World News, and it gives me great pleasure to be up here on the panel with these distinguished experts in the realm of disaster risk reduction and the whole issue of resilience. I just want to say one or two things with regards to you as well, because we will have a question and answer opportunity towards the end of our panel discussion. So if you've got a question you'd like to throw to our panel, you are extremely welcome. We have a little microphone on one end there. We should have another microphone there. So please just address the microphone, name, your organisation, and a question. I should point out this is recorded. It will be edited slightly, so if you opt for a nice long intervention, I can guarantee now it'll be cut. So keep it to questions. That'll be much more useful for the time. There's one other thing I wanted to make a point about. As this is televised, I get a sense here that this is the land of the converted. A lot of the preaching going on here is to those who've already swallowed the pill and bought the medicine. We're going to be talking and putting out a message to an awful lot of people who have not given it the same sort of time to think. So I think some of the areas of discussion we hope will be open and clear and understandable for that sort of an audience. And I suppose I'm part of that audience. I've never been to Sendai, but I have seen Sendai, of course, in pictures on the television. In fact, on the morning of the tsunami, the morning my time in London, I was on shift preparing to go on air when the first pictures started rolling into us. And they were nature's 9/11 pictures, weren't they? They were so dramatic, so gripping, so awful and awesome that they never really leave the memory. And that makes this such an obvious and perfect place to be discussing ways in which we have to get so much further down the line of disaster risk reduction. And while you may have been involved in this for a number of years now, I assure you the vast majority of people out there are probably not even aware that discussion has started. So what I'm going to do now is introduce the panel, which I'll do to the camera here, and we will be underway. So thank you very much for being with us, and don't forget, you'll have an opportunity for questions in due course. And so to our panel on this key issue of disaster reduction. Let me start that again. It'd be good to have a nice clean start, wouldn't it? And so to our panel here of experts on the subject of disaster risk reduction. To my left is Toshiyuki Shiga, who is Vice Chairman of Nissan, and at the time of the tsunami, you were Chief Operating Officer. Mr. Shiga, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Martin Parker is the Chairman of Global Partnerships for Swiss Re Insurance, with particular attention, Martin, being paid to the public sector and the work you do in that field. Yes. Senator LOREN Legarda is not just one of the most recognized and formidable politicians in the Philippines, but is also globally recognized for her environmental work. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Aris Papadopoulos was the Chief Executive Officer of Titan America, a major concrete company in the United States, and now is developing a lot of his time as a champion for greater levels of resilience, particularly in our buildings. And also Gerry Brownlee, who is the New Zealand Defence Minister and Minister for Earthquake Recovery. Obviously, the focus very much on the work you're doing in Christchurch. Gerry, thank you for being with us too. Senator Legarda, let me start with you, if I can. I mean, you come from a country which, let's say, is pretty familiar with natural disasters by now.
Only 20 typhoons a year,
right,
with volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and
right,
more natural hazards. But we have a resilient 100 million population.
A very resilient population. Nonetheless, with all that experience, 3 years ago, you get caught from the blind side, if I can put it that way. Tacloban loses 8,000 people die. Yes. Cyclone Haiyan, a cyclone on a level you haven't seen before.
That's true.
What does that say to you about resilience? Is nature always one step ahead of us, or are we not learning the lessons of experience?
First of all, allow me to tell you that we were not caught in a blind side insofar as legislation is concerned, because as Margareta Wallstrom, the head of the UNISDR, has said, that the Philippines is actually two of the best laws in the world, which is the Climate Change Act as well as the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, which even parliamentarians from the East African National Assembly have used as a model. However, and this is where the private sector comes in and business, etc., the gaps and challenges lies in how to operationalize it on the ground. It's not easy when Haiyan hits you. No matter how prepared you are, 8,000 people have perished up to now. Recovery is ongoing. And so what do we do? I'm glad the business sector is here. Business continuity planning. The way to do it is let us allow, or we must mandate, that disaster risk reduction should not just be everybody's business. Its resilience should be in our DNA. The way we breathe, we live, and we speak, and we eat should be DRR everywhere. Whether you are in government infrastructure, whether you are in private infrastructure, or in school buildings, or in reinsurance, or a policymaker, or even in media. We need you to talk about DRR more. When there are conflicts and tensions and wars in the world, media covers. Then what is DRR? What is that? Resilience, what is that? So we have to brand DRR as something that would affect our daily lives. For after all, in the 2015 GAR assessment report, $300 billion annually of economic losses is lost due to disasters. But if we mainstream disaster risk reduction, it would probably be half of that.
Gerry Brownlee, you would know well enough that it's absolutely true. We all have a very close focus when the disaster has struck. We all want to see what's going on then, and to a certain extent afterwards. Difficult to build in the resilience beforehand, but what sort of lessons do you feel you have picked up from Christchurch and taken forward, particularly in terms of buildings regulations, tougher structures, better infrastructure? Can you give us an example of the ways in which things have changed in Christchurch?
Well, there are many examples of how things have changed. I think the obvious one is that you strengthen your building codes. So in our situation, we had an event that was the world's third biggest insurance disaster since 1970. While it was on a scale of actual damage smaller than Sendai or the Philippines, for us it was very big. We're only a population of 4.5 million people. So we had what we thought were strong building codes, and they saved people's lives. But nonetheless, 1,000 buildings in our CBD had to be demolished because they were no longer structurally sound. So we've learnt that we have to not only prepare for an event like this where resilience is about saving people's lives, but now perhaps look also at preserving economic value as well.
Would you go so far as to say that the levels of building codes prior to the earthquake, now you see it, were simply not sufficient?
Well, it's very difficult to make that assessment because you, of course, build to the technology available at the time that you're building, and you have a code that will be about the strength that you see as being required. We also had two types of earthquake. We had the oscillating earthquake that creates the shaking, but then, of course, we had also vertical acceleration. So all of our buildings were lifted repeatedly over about 44 seconds at the rate of twice gravity, and then dropped again. So 3 times the force of gravity on those buildings over that period of time. You have to have very, very strong codes to beat that. We're fortunate that we had buildings that stood up to that battering in so much that they didn't collapse, apart from 2, and people got out. But in the future, we'd want to have engineering input that would take that type of activity.
That, Aris, would be music to your ears, I imagine, because I know you don't believe that building codes are sufficient generally across the piece. And
Just picking up a little. Oh, sorry, I was tapping. Sorry,
that's fine. Aris, I imagine that will be music to your ears, because I know you don't believe that across the piece building codes essentially are strong enough. Does it take a disaster, do you think, to strengthen building codes? And is it fair to say across the board they're not strong enough?
Unfortunately, David, you're right. It's almost like health. You know, it takes a heart attack for some people to realize that they need to live a healthy lifestyle. And the problem we have is that we're waiting for the heart attacks to happen to do the right things oftentimes.
It's not nearby.
But please, we don't. Secretary General yesterday mentioned an important figure. He said that the economic cost of disasters has reached $300 billion on average a year. Well, that's more than the GDP of 80% of the world's countries. So maybe we're saving lives. There are, escape approaches, but then people don't have their homes to go back to, their communities, and so forth. And when you look at the built environment, it is a span of structures. You have the infrastructure and large commercial and some public and institutional facilities, and then you have the residential and smaller commercial facilities. And there's an 80-20 paradox there, in that even at this conference, we spend probably 80% of our time talking about infrastructure and large public, and yet 80% of the built environment is actually the smaller homes, residential, and light commercial. And when it comes to resilience, the bar may be here for infrastructure and large commercial, but the bar is way down here today for residential and small commercial. And that's what people's livelihoods, that's where most of people's savings is, in their homes and their communities, and we're losing that battle.
That's very interesting. Gerry Brownlee, you were saying a lot of homes suffered, but they weren't destroyed. So I don't know if you would counter that argument a little.
I think it depended entirely on the age of the home and the land that it was built on. So if you go back 50 years, people would simply calculate the weight of a house and then put in a foundation to support that weight. Now, of course, you look at, or we do in New Zealand, look at the geological structure of that land and then build a foundation that's satisfactory for taking that particular property should it get buffeted about. So our codes are definitely rising, improving. Our methods of foundation construction changing and for the better. What I think is interesting, though, is that we've had timber frame construction in New Zealand for a very, very long time, virtually since post-European occupation of the country. And so that technology also has moved quite considerably in the last 50 years particularly, and now has taken another step. So if I look at new homes being built post-earthquake, greater consideration of various Z factors in it, a whole lot better bracing, and also then on those foundations that are going to allow the land to move as it will in future events without disturbing the state of the building.
I think that's very important that you mentioned two words, risk and hazard, because risk assessment is so important, whether you're a policymaker or in the local government sector or in housing, for example. Whether you're in New Zealand or in the Philippines or whatever area of the world, risk assessment must be done by developers in housing, etc., before you build a home. Will I build my home or a school building or a classroom in a geohazard area? Is this a vulnerable area that is prone to a storm surge or to a landslide or to soil erosion? And therefore, an environmental impact assessment should include risk assessment and perhaps a geohazard map in every city, municipality, which we're doing in the Philippines, which I'm certain is done in many other areas of the world, should be institutionalized. In fact, it is a no-brainer when you say that we want to build green buildings, green homes, because you actually save 30 to 50% from your water bills and your electricity bills. However, all these green sustainability structures should incorporate risk assessment and incorporate a geohazard assessment as well before it is even built.
We've turned very heavily to the science to know exactly those factors that exist in our country. But the guys who know the most about risk and the best people to analyse what risk are, in my opinion, are in the private sector and do lie with the insurers.
Well, you point straight to Martin Parker, and I wonder whether Senator Loren's view is that should be mandatory. You should have that sort of level of risk assessment made. But we live in this ever-increasingly urbanised world. Everyone's got to find a place. Yes. Every last inch is being used up. Can you do that?
I think it's very hard to make it mandatory for all sorts of political and social reasons, but it's got to be best practice. It's got to become something that in the future we spend a lot more time on. So I think if you look at history, it was Henry Ford who very famously, and we can all see that iconic black and white photo of the builders on the iron grid above Manhattan. And Henry Ford said, yeah, without the insurers, this just would not be possible. We wouldn't build buildings that could be just brought to the ground by a cigarette button in that case, because fire risk was a huge risk. But now natural catastrophes is much more. So what the insurance industry do, alongside the work that you do actually, is help to put a price tag on that risk. So if you choose to be in this location, what would be the cost of insurance, which gives you an idea of the level of risk that is associated. So in Japan, for instance, they've had building codes since 1981, brought around for the first time because of the experience post-earthquakes of losses. Those building codes have been enhanced over the years as more knowledge and science and engineering has come to the fore and further earthquake events have happened. So when it comes to pricing those risks, the insurance industry is quite granular in terms of looking at that data and figuring out the generations of the buildings and the risks.
Just before you come in, Ellen, I want to bring in Mr. Shiga as well, because obviously Nissan was one of those companies which came out with a gold star, frankly, to its name. This is not meant to be an opportunity to sing your praises particularly, but it's true, your recovery was very fast. Do you think, A, as Martin said, that the building code levels are sufficient in Japan, hence your ability to recover, and B, what was it, do you think, that enabled you to deal with this better than others? Luck, or was there a strategy behind it?
Okay. As he said, that the Japan's government revised the building regulation in 1981. So actually, the building constructed before 1981 is still big risk. And after 1981, even though Hanshin or the Great East Japan earthquake, not so much damage. And based on this regulation, my company, Nissan Motor, conducted anti-earthquake reinforcement since 2003. And most of all the big facility has already reinforced based on the new regulations. And as a matter of fact, that the Great East Japan earthquake, that no building damage in our facilities. But there are several, for example, ceiling board fell down, or one of the manufacturing plant is overhead conveyors, that fall down. And also some of the machining facilities, that machining itself is moving. Yeah? And, but luckily, that we had no injured employees thanks to the emergency drill.
Does that say to you you were sufficiently resilient or insufficiently resilient?
Actually, yeah. I think regarding the building code, I think the Japanese standard has already enough. Even though we need some of the revisions, but this is my opinion. Regulation itself is okay. However, we need more. We have to reinforce more kind of ceiling board fell down, and also piping in the ceiling. We have to be care more, not only for the building itself, more internal facilities. And the second question you said, the reason why Nissan could, that the recovery relatively quickly as a Japanese company. There are two reasons. This is my summary. One is we conducted a lot of the disaster drill before the disasters, and also this is very luckily we conducted simulation drill just 2 weeks before the earthquake, March 11th, and this is disaster headquarters simulations.
So it just happened that 2 weeks before the tsunami and the earthquake struck, you carried out a full crisis scenario.
Yeah, they are really, fortunately, unfortunately, that the assumption of the disaster simulation itself is completely almost same. So that we quickly, implemented for the countermeasures. This is one of the reasons. Another reason is, that the Gemba people, operation people, this is one of the Japanese strengths, the work together and make every effort to restore the plant and so on, including the supplier.
That's critical, but that is not prevention, is it? That's
prevention is, as I said, we reinforce, our facilities before disasters, and also we conducted a lot of drilling, Gemba level, and also kind of headquarter level, the management level.
Right. I want to move this on a little bit now to the question of private and public sectors working together, or not working terribly well together. Gerry Brownlee, let me ask you, in terms of some of the developments, some of the new developments that you're bringing in to Christchurch to make the infrastructure more durable, more flexible, more resilient, you might be able to give me an example or two, I don't know, but can you also give me an idea as to who is driving the innovation there? Is that coming courtesy of government or in conjunction with private? Because it's usually private sector who come up with the innovative ideas.
It's a strong mix of both. Just picking up on a comment before, we've had since 1945 an insurance scheme run by the government known as the Earthquake Commission that provides first loss insurance on residential properties and building platforms. Now that takes the first loss. It's the insurance industry that picks up the balance of that. And so we were very lucky to have an in excess of 95% penetration of insurance cover on residential areas. It's worked very well for us. When it comes
to that means you're not paying as government.
Yeah.
Is that right? There's no payout from the government.
No, so the cost of our disaster is measured at about $46 billion US, and the government will end up paying for about 20% of that. 80% of it is going to come from the private insurance market. So extrapolating that out a bit, we had very significant damage to underground infrastructure, which no one sees, your sewer, your wastewater, your fresh water. And the way in which we've chosen to go about fixing that is to put together an alliance structure between the 5 biggest civil construction companies in New Zealand and get them into the field alongside local government people who've got a knowledge of that infrastructure and just go ahead and repair it. And the government sits in a governance arrangement above that, simply providing the funding alongside local government. And that might seem somewhat risky, but it has had the effect of those people who have that massive expertise being able to put together a program that can move quickly, and then a governance structure that keeps the propriety and all the fiduciary aspects of it in check. And it's working extremely well. But that is, no government is going to have the standing capacity to go in and do that sort of work with the speed that the private sector can.
Harrison.
Well, I think both New Zealand and Japan are kind of at the top of the peak here. I also had a chance to visit the Philippines before coming to Japan, and really can appreciate the challenge they have there in addressing both resilience and also the social standards, moving the social standards at the same time up. The discussion between private and public sectors is often times an issue of getting on the same frequency, getting to the same language, because sometimes we don't speak the same language. And I'll give you some simple examples. One coming from this conference itself. One of the major, let's say, slogans here is "Build Back Better." Okay, to us that's not satisfying. It should be "Build Better" from the start. So waiting for disaster to happen to build back better just won't get us there in the end.
Well, you're splitting hairs at the moment, though, aren't you? Given where we are in this process, which is not very far advanced, you settle for "Build Back Better."
But we're building a lot of things from scratch. We're investing a lot of money today, billions and billions of dollars every day, building new things. Why not build them better from the start, instead of facing them years down the road in terms of disasters? The other point of communication is on this whole issue of affordability. Whenever we talk about building codes, about regulations, about standards, we always get into the discussion, well, we can't afford it. What is affordable? What is not affordable? And the dilemma is this, in that you can make anything unaffordable, or you can make anything affordable by lowering the standards. You can have affordable food with low standards, affordable health, but that's not what we want. And affordable at the end is not the most economic. When you add the cost of disasters, the cost of maintenance, the social cost, it is probably the most expensive option. So really the question needs to be phrased in how do we make resilience more affordable, not how we make the built environment more affordable by lowering the standards. How can we work together between public and private to make the construction more affordable, to make materials more affordable, more available, and so on and so forth. If we can bring that dialogue to that frequency, I think we can get somewhere.
Yes, I think there is no disconnect between the private and the public sector because clearly, and if I may disagree with the gentleman beside me from Swiss Re, indeed risk assessment can be mandated. I think it's being defeatist for us to say that we just have to focus on the best practices and we cannot mandate it. That's what governments are there for. That's what policymakers are there for. There is no way to turn back. We must mandate that risk assessment be mandated in local government, in private infrastructure. Building codes must be improved, and vulnerability assessments and its impact on health, on the structure's integrity must all be inputted. And all of that information can come from, what the gentleman from New Zealand has mentioned, from science and the private sector. That's why I've always believed that all our multi-hazard early warning systems must be risk-informed, must be based on the risk assessment. And if we do that, then we don't have to build back better. Because when you build from the start and you build for the best, you know the risks. You reduce the risk when you know where it stands, and you build based on that risk. As I said from the beginning, developers, let me just see who's in the audience. Their family is the richest Filipino family. They're in the Forbes list. I am certain when they build their super malls, the biggest mall in Asia, by the way, is in the Philippines, they don't build it on land that will erode or land that will be the subject of a landslide or a land where a storm surge would happen. Risk assessment is done, I'm sure, with a businessman like Mr. C, who incidentally is a private sector champion of the Philippines. What I'm saying is that whether you're in government, especially in the private sector, in the reinsurance business, risk information and assessment is so essential. And there is no other way but to include that and input that in all your studies, whether you're a policymaker or a businessman.
Martin, the question of policymakers have their role to play, but insurance companies surely could do so much more, couldn't they, to incentivize more resilient homes and buildings?
Well, in fact, yeah, I think we already mentioned that putting a price tag on risk, so a differential price is one reason for incentivizing those resilient buildings. But I think if you step back a little bit, and I welcome the Senator's challenge that it should be mandated, and I guess
This
Philippines
is a debate,
can
right?
lead. Yeah, exactly. And I guess
It virtually is mandated, though, isn't it? I mean, you won't offer a policy on a big risk unless you know what that risk is.
exactly. So we have the data, we have the insight. We may even send risk engineers to take a look at it.
Yeah.
But I think if we step back
But in some countries, I think, Harris, in the United States, for example, the government ends up taking that risk, doesn't it, on some areas of insurance?
The huge residential market. It's a huge risk. And many insurance companies are withdrawing from it because the bar is set down so low.
Well,
to Gerry's point, the quality of the risk. Yeah.
It is, but I mean, our experience has been that we've had a big disaster. We've been a client of reinsurance companies through EQC for a long number of years. When we've had our disaster, they've certainly been there to stand alongside us and to get us through it in a very positive fashion. And in the end, it's about how much a country is prepared to accept that it's going to have that risk. You know, I don't mean to criticise the United States, but I find it amazing that we're a Pacific Rim country that can have 95% plus of our residential properties insured. Yet in somewhere like California, it's down below 17%. And you just ask, well, why is that? What's the reason? Part of our success, I think, has been having one body that is mandated to offer that first loss cover. It occurred because the private insurers didn't want the risk, but once it was taken on in the first instance by this body, very quickly, as you got better information about what that risk was, everyone piled in. And you know, I think that model is open to anyone, and New Zealand's very happy to share that with anyone anywhere in the world.
Harris, would the American model be an anomaly?
Yeah. that could work and cannot work. I'm kind of divided as to whether government should be in insurance or not be in insurance. The flood insurance program in the U.S. has been a failure. They're losing $20 billion a year, obviously taxpayer money. They're not improving the resilience, and they're really incentivizing risk-taking. So, you know, government sometimes getting insurance is a double-edged sword. They can promote the wrong side of risk if they don't price it properly, if they don't advance resilience.
It's getting a little technical, but I think it's where you take that risk that's important. And if you let people know that, in our case, it's set at the moment at about $100,000 first loss, and then after that it's topped up by private insurers. And I think it's confronting people with that fact that you could lose this if you don't insure it. And relative to the value of your asset, relative to the capital gain that's going to be on that asset, your insurance payments are pretty light.
Right. I want to move towards attitude a little bit in terms of resilience, and I'm going to start back with you, Martin, because is there an attitude within the insurance world that, yes, we should be playing a part in the improvement of resilience, or is it simple numbers, it's statistic, it's what's on the balance sheet?
No, it's of course we've got shareholders, we've got P&L responsibilities, but we take a long-term view of the ecosystem that we participate in. And I think the point I was going to make earlier was there's space to collaborate much more about doing these risk assessments, of having an insurance experienced person alongside if you're building a big mull. I'm sure in those instances, as well as surveyors and other people, the lessons learned and the knowledge of the insurance industry can be brought to bear to the benefit of all. So I think resilience for us is definitely worth investing in.
On that question of attitude and cultural perspective on resilience, Mr. Shiga, this is a country which knows only too well what an earthquake can do, what a tsunami can do. Do you detect any change, sort of even cultural change in attitude towards a need to be even more resilient, for 9-meter high walls along your coast to be 15 meters high? I mean, what is the sort of Japanese prevailing view now?
Yes, of course, you know, after the great East Japan's earthquake and tsunamis, and not only for this tsunami, but also, you know, a lot of natural disasters occurred, even since, you know, that after the 2011, like even last years, we had a big, you know, that landslide disasters, 50 people died. This is developed by local government areas. People construct a small house and, you know, the land completely collapsed. This type of, and also heavy rain or heavy snows, you know, Japan is the country, you know, that we have a lot of the natural disasters. But really, I think, you know, that the mindset, how to treat, how to tackle the disasters, kind of the mindset becomes too much, you know, higher for all the people, I think.
Right, which of course then enables policy to change, to adapt to that possibly. Senator Legarda, what about in the Philippines? I mean, I remember hearing someone in fact it was in Samoa, saying we're a very resilient people. And actually the fact is they may be resilient people, but the infrastructure ain't resilient. And I wonder what the view the Filipinos have about their country. They see themselves as resilient people maybe, but that nature takes its course anyway.
Nature takes its course, but both the Filipinos in terms of culture and attitude and our infrastructure are on the way of becoming more resilient. There are lessons learned from not just Haiyan, but past typhoons. It has been with us since time immemorial, but because of changes in climate change and extreme weather events, it has become more frequent and more intense. So businessmen, those in government, and the 100 million population have learned to adapt to this kind of extreme weather events and have learned their lessons. What do I mean? In areas which are prone to storm surge, the government has instituted mechanisms where it is a no-build zone, and this must be followed, of course.
Is it followed?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It is difficult to actually implement this on the ground. But the fact is there's greater awareness on this, and early warning systems is so important because we already have the multi-hazard early warning systems. The challenge to communicate it, remember we're an archipelago of 7,100 beautiful islands with 100 million intelligent and good people. Now, how do you get this information to all these people in different languages in an archipelago of 7,100 islands? That's a challenge. You have the center of the Department of Science and Technology and the Weather Bureau, but it has to be communicated by internet, by text, SMS, etc. This will, if you inform the community, they can actually evacuate. Now, forcibly evacuating communities who have been living on these little islands, who have been living by the coast, but because of Haiyan, and they see that they will be washed out by the storm surge or the tsunami or the floods, then there's no choice. So the horrors of the past have become, if I may, the inspiration to do a better job next time and the wake-up call for all of us.
Well, it'd be good if the wake-up call really is there, wouldn't it? Because, Aris, I just wanted to ask you, and you brought up the issue of affordability, for example. People don't want to pay more for anything, let's be honest. And if they see that's the level now, why on earth should we raise it to here on the basis there may or may not be a problem down the line? Do you think there's a cultural shift at all?
I think there needs to be a culture shift. It hasn't started really yet. I mean, in our daily lives, we upgrade ourselves in many things that we procure. We don't buy the least expensive food item. We don't get the least expensive health care. We don't get the least expensive education. And yet, in the most important part of our lives, which is our home, we seem to indirectly accept the bottom that the system, let's say, has set for us. And that bottom is below the hazard level. We don't realize that it is below the hazard level, but it is in many countries below the hazard level. So I think the awareness, the education, to tell people there is a choice. You have a choice. You can go above that minimum. You're doing it in every other part of your life. You don't have the lowest feature cell phone, for example, or smartphone. Why not upgrade yourself on resilience? So that is an attitude that has to be cultivated, and we need probably to learn from the auto industry, which went through a similar phase in the 60s, 50 years ago. And today, they try to outmarket each other based on the safety features of their product. We don't do that in the building industry, unfortunately, yet.
That's quite a goal to aim for, isn't it? Gerry, let me just ask you, I mean, when you have a crisis, and you've obviously been working through a crisis with Christchurch, that's the point, obviously, when everyone is up for change and adapting and improving. After a while, that crisis has become a drama for those people who aren't sorted out, but it's not a crisis anymore. And the drive for change can dip. What's the experience in Christchurch?
Well, no dip just yet. I think there's an expectation that, with all due respect to those who might be worried about it, that we will build back better, that what we're going to end up with a city that is vastly improved on what it was before, but also much more aware of what its risks are than it was before. And I think, people do talk about it. Once again, going back to the science, we have a wonderful organisation called the Geonuclear Science organisation, and they publish on a daily basis information about earthquakes, about tsunami, about all the sort of risks. And one of the features, I think, that's come out as a bit of a legacy from our disaster has been that a terrific number of people now have that as an app on their phone and can see that actually we live in a world where the earth moves all the time, where events happen all the time, and that if you are aware of that and you get the type of warning, if you like, then you can prepare for it. Around the construction of homes, very, very different attitude now than to what would have been the case 5 years ago, where people are much more appreciative of some of those extra costs that are going to go into new builds that will protect them in the future. So I take your point, I think. The other point I'd say is that if you go back a couple of decades, the ability for people to actually understand all this, to get the information quickly and to assimilate it, didn't exist as it does now. We live in a world where everything is sort of, this is an extraordinarily long interview on television. It's normally, from a politician's point of view, if you can't say it in 12 seconds, don't bother. But similarly, it's the way we communicate these days, short bursts of information. And in that, a huge volume of information is assimilated by people, and I think they can pick up these things and grasp those concepts much more readily than might have been the case a while back.
Okay, well, you better stop there. That was well over 12 seconds. Martin, quickly.
David, thank you. Yeah, I just think the history and the lessons in Japan have been handed down through the generations, and I think this is going to happen now in New Zealand. So where it has happened, we as a society need either sometimes through regulation, but sometimes through just customs and information flows, education, help the society understand what they need to do. I think the scenarios where we have the barrier so low, people can convince themselves that kind of thing and never happened to me. Well, it never happened to me probably won't be the mindset in New Zealand and isn't in Japan. And if it's never happened to me, then maybe we need to put regulation in to change that. I don't think the human beings will change it of their own volition.
On that note, I'm going to open it up to the floor to see if we have some questions. Yes, I know. So if you wouldn't mind getting to the microphone, that would be very helpful. Thank you. You've made it all the way around. Thank you. Is that okay? Sorry, just bear with us. You've got 12 seconds.
You said 12 seconds.
You good? Well, you've probably got a more tolerant media in your country.
Your media?
So if you could let us know who you are and your organisation. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I'm fine. Well, my name is Ramesh Jaura. I'm from IPS Enterprise Service News Agency. I think the critical question is not whether the people who are marginalized and who are vulnerable, whether they have the sufficient resilience. The question is, are the rich countries, the industrialized countries, prepared to come up with the necessary funding and the technologies?
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let me start with the rich country over on the far side of the table. Gerry?
Well, as I said earlier, we're a very small country, but we do live well. We acknowledge that. But we have significant foreign aid programs that we run. And, you know, if you look at what happens in a disaster, all of the things that we've discussed here happen. You try and do things better, you try and move forward, your awareness is heightened. For a lot of those countries that struggle economically, they don't have those choices. The way they get those choices is by having large capital pools available to them at the time they need them. And I do think the World Bank efforts to try and club up some countries to get some form of insurance cover where there's known risks is a good idea. And I do think that some of us who are more developed should be putting some of our foreign aid money into those premiums.
It should and should, isn't it? Because it's very hard work. I mean, it's certainly not a sort of internationalised attitude that you get now to climate change. Should it be?
I think it should be. I think it's much more tangible as far as creating a result's concerned than some of the stuff that we're talking about with climate change.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Aris?
I'm not a country representative, so I can't commit any country, but I want to say something about the construction sector in terms of information and knowledge and support. This is not rocket science. In other words, we know how to build resiliently. I mean, it's in all the textbooks. It's in hundreds of references. The knowledge is there. And the willingness to share information is there too. I mean, there's often outreach between countries to share information on engineering and so forth. The issue is one of doing, of acting on it. So I think the private sector, and this is what I'm involved with ISDR, is trying to network amongst itself to be able to help countries, you know, at many levels raise the bar and practice that raising of the bar. So I can only speak from the private sector side, but to me that's part of the solution.
Public sector side?
Yes, thank you for that. As a developing nation and as a victim, in a way, of Haiyan and many others previous to that, we welcome the outpouring of support, technical, financial, from the developed world. However, I believe that investment should come in, not only in terms of recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction after the disaster has struck, but even before. So perhaps since you're in construction and you're in insurance and you're from Japan and New Zealand, etc., the investment in the Philippines could be green, sustainable investments in disaster risk reduction in many areas where you are involved in. So what I'm saying is that if you were to invest $1 billion in a company, in a project, it could be invested with DRR in mind even before the natural hazard has struck. Because in terms of countries coming to help, it always happens, and we are grateful for that. We are grateful for the charity of others. But the charity would be better if it comes even before the disaster strikes for green, sustainable investment.
Thank you.
That's the point in putting a price on risk, I think. I'll take your point. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions for the gentleman here?
Extreme events that occur in the recent years has shown that nature can surpass the expectations that we have about these events. No? So my question is that how the industrialized world can help the developing countries in order to foster the science and technology that we know we need in order to understand better these events and to prepare better to their impact.
Thank you. Could you just tell me who you are and where you're from?
My name is Mario Ruiz. I'm director of the Instituto Geofísico in Quito, Ecuador.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Shiga, do you have a thought about that?
I think after earthquake, tsunami, 2011, I think most of all the Japanese industries, Japanese companies started to work. How can we contribute to reduce the disaster risk? And even though my company is automotive companies, we cannot contribute directly. But for example, we are doing, we are selling the electric vehicle, 1% electric vehicle. After the earthquake, the fuel supply is completely stopped and takes a time to recover normally. So then, electric vehicle was working well at that time. So then, since last year, we donated our vehicle to all the Japanese 47 prefectures to donate free of charge, and also not only for the vehicles but also charging and using the electricity storage in the vehicle back to the home. We call the lift to home. We donated. This type of vehicles product can be helpful during the disaster period. So this is most of all the companies now how to contribute for to minimize or mitigate for the disaster risk.
Yeah, thank you. Martin?
Thank you. Swiss Re is supporting a Rockefeller Foundation initiative to create 100 resilient cities. And in that program, which is gaining quite some traction now, there's the appointment of a resilience officer, chief resilience officer of each of those cities. We look at day one in the job is what risks do we face? Day two is how can we mitigate and reduce those risks? Day three, do we consider transferring any of those risks? And then day four is what do I do with my residual risk? And one of the things that is very important, and this is a global initiative with the first 65, 66 cities announced. The next batch will be in December of this year. But those chief resilience officers have a network now where they will meet regularly, but they have open lines of communication to share their knowledge and their experience. It's quite early stages, but I'm very optimistic this will be a real conduit to sharing lessons learned and having a supportive environment between the industrialized and the emerging.
Movement. We just have a little bit of time left for, yes, we have another gentleman there and then one at the back. We may be able to squeeze one more in as well.
From Bangladesh. My organizations two, Center for Human Rights Movement and another one, Save the Sundarban Foundation. 3 months ago, oil explosion in the mangrove forest, a lot of a huge well explored, unrefinable well explored there. And any technology to remove from the river well, now in the areas of people affected on fuel, unrefined oil, they are really affected. Dolphin died, tiger died, bird dies, and now affected in local people. And long-term, there are diseases. So I want to know how can we remove the oil from the large river? Thank you very much.
Okay, it's a very practical example of the sort of
Could you
disasters
repeat maybe
that
the
face.
question, because I didn't hear all of it.
It's contamination of a river through a disaster in Bangladesh, and how you then restore the river to its natural cleanliness. A very specific example, but I think a very good illustration that is the level of assistance that is required by many countries.
That's at the bottom end of the problem, isn't it? So the river has become contaminated because the oil field failed or the refinery failed or whatever it was. So environmental standards are very, very important when it comes to those sort of installations that can have knock-on effects. And, you know, I can't imagine that's owned by anybody other than a large international that should be meeting its obligations. So perhaps some international pressure might be useful in that regard. Clean up, I'm not an expert in that, I can't comment.
Briefly?
Definitely, there must be accountability for environmental cleanup. That happens in local ordinances, and that happens in national policy. If it does not exist yet in Bangladesh, and I doubt that it does not exist because the IPU president is from Bangladesh, you must know that there must be some law or local ordinance that covers that. So find out the company that caused the pollution on the oil spill. If not, give it to me after this session, and I will tell the parliamentarian who's head of interparliamentary union, or go to your local mayor, because there must be accountability, whether it's in the public or the private sector.
Bit of direct action. Thank you very much for that. Now, we're down to the last couple of minutes, but we have a question.
Thank you. My name is David Owino from Kenya. I work for the national broadcaster. I like the concept or the idea of building better from the very beginning. But there's an interesting side of business or private sector that we also need to look at. That is not the multinational corporations or the huge corporations that we have mentioned, for example. They are SMEs in struggling economies to whom every profit counts. And to them, every coin saved is a coin earned. And resilience may not be a priority to them because it doesn't, the vision is quite short-term. So while we talk about countries inspiring other countries or developed countries inspiring and encouraging, even providing incentives for developing countries, could we also talk about the multinational corporations inspiring the struggling SMEs in struggling economies to build better from the very beginning? Are there structures that they could put, programs that they could come up with that would encourage that from the very beginning? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is quite important, the questions. Now, one of the big damage for the automotive industry in the 2011 was supply chain disruptions. There are a lot of the small, medium-sized companies located here, and they could not, restart production. So then this is a big impact. So now we are making kind of the business continuity plan. It's each layer, not only for the tier 1 supplier, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, up to tier 10. And recent, according to recent articles, the Toyota already investigated up to tier 10. And can you imagine, tier 10 is quite small. And this supply is not only for located in Japan, but also the very many countries. So the BCP, business continuity plan, we request to the small company. This is also, the business. So the resilience can be a kind of the value for the business. This is one of the examples.
Aris, thank you.
Yeah, building on Mr. Shiga's thoughts, and this is one of the concepts I've noted in my book on resilience, the e-book just released, is that there are chains of resilience. I call them supply chain, but really let's call them chains of resilience. where it's not enough just to elevate your own business. You have to look back to your suppliers, and many of those are small and medium businesses, and help them when they're looking at making even small investments, give them some advice, give them some support, but also encourage them to do that. You have to do that with your customers, too, who many of them are small businesses. Elevate them. And, of course, you have to do that with your own employees, because if you lose your employees or they lose their homes, they're not going to be very responsive during a disaster. So, this chains of resilience is very important to try to elevate many parties at the same time. And we can do that as larger companies more successfully, I think.
Well, I think there's a responsibility on larger companies, as there is on governments, on a national, local, international scale as well. That is the point at which we're going to have to close for now. So I would just like to say to you all from on behalf of the panel here, thank you very much indeed for being with us and taking part. And if I could also say thank you to Toshiyuka Shiga, to Martin Parker, to Senator Legarda, to Aris Papadopoulos, and to Gerry Brownlee. Thank you very much. Gerry, I do beg your pardon. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.